That being said, what I'd like to do is maybe ask for some applause for our speaker, Ms. Katie Eyre.
Well, he may have oversold me a bit. I noticed I got a call when City of Hillsborough got your newsletter, and I got a call from the City of Hillsborough, and they wanted to know exactly what was I going to talk about. And I never did hook up back with them, but I think that they have some fear that I might be portraying a certain approval or disapproval of certain things that they might be doing. He also said that I'm a dynamic speaker. Let me just kind of set the record straight. I'm a CPA, and I focus on taxes. I'm a former politician, and I was the Vice President of the Hillsborough Planning Commission, and now as of January, back on the Planning Commission for the City of Hillsborough. And I'm talking about transportation. Nothing there, Eric, speaks dynamic. Nothing. So I applaud you for being here and listening, and I understand you have a reputation in the community of actually being involved in the learned audience. So it's a bit intimidating for me, because many of you probably know as much or more about anything I might ever speak about when it comes to community. I got my roots of really serving in the community on the Planning Commission. Some of you may have how many of you have ever been before the Hillsborough Planning Commission?
You mean to testify or to be there?
Just, well, either, any. So quite a few of you. How recently, within the last 10 years or so?
About 4 months.
Oh, so recent.
For South Hillsborough.
For South Hillsborough. Okay, South Hillsborough, I focus on the OHSU Amber Glen. For a few years, I sat on that master planning steering committee there, actually. I have not been as involved in South Hillsborough, and I'm now getting up to speed. I've recently seen some mapping of transportation, but I'm only now getting up to speed on what that means. And so I can honestly tell you, I have no opinion at this point as to the right direction or wrong direction or how we're going on that. And of course, that's very sensitive to you on 209th particularly, and the funding of these improvements. But one of the things, some of us, well, when I was on there before, I left the commission in 2010. One of the things that the Planning Commission really was proud of, and it's where I learned public service, was it's important for citizens to be heard. That is the most important thing. And we on the Planning Commission are appointed by City Council, and we want to make sure that the citizens are heard. We may not always agree, but the City of Hillsborough, it's interesting, this isn't about Hillsborough as much as to tell you where I come from for governance, is the City of Hillsborough's Planning Commission is unique to most, including Washington County's Planning Commission, which is different. City of Hillsborough's Planning Commission, the staff does not make recommendations to them on applications and such. They give us the facts, they give us their findings, but they don't make recommendations. These are on applications. And it's because the commission wants to keep the integrity that we as commissioners, representative of the citizens, that we're actually going to make our own mind up. And most other planning commissions, the agency actually makes a recommendation in their report to the commission. And it's really important. Now, we also, we just had a work session on a different issue, and what we're learning is what we call type 2 applications. Those are applications where there's still public input provided, but they're done administratively. There's no public hearing. And what we're getting feedback on from the citizens in the community, that they feel that that isn't, even though they get the public notice that something's going on, and they're able to enter into the public process, that they feel like they're still not part of the public process. So we as a commission have heard that loud and clear, and so we're going to revisit the public hearings process and type 2 applications as well as some other things, because citizens need to be heard. And that's really, I don't know, did you, when you came to the Hillsborough Planning Commission, I haven't been on it again for the last couple of years, and there have been some changes, did you feel at least heard, even though you may not have agreed, did you feel heard, or did you feel that they were actively listening?
No.
No, you didn't feel that. Can you give an example?
It's like going to a Twilight Hills Park and Rec or Metro, especially Metro. They do these citizens planning meetings and everything, but nine times out of 10 they do exactly what it's like it's for show.
Was that,
We met with everybody and everybody was in favor of this and so forth. And I've sat in meetings when that wasn't the case at all, and they did what they wanted anyway, so.
that was a hearing, not a work session? I mean, it was an actual, in that big auditorium?
In some cases,
And did you testify?
yes.
And when you testified, did you feel heard? You still didn't feel heard?
You know they're gonna do what they're gonna do. It's a waste of time.
So that's, I'm sorry that you walked away feeling that way, and that's good information to have. Because when we talk about transportation or any other area of anything, I believe government should not happen to you. It should not be something that happens to you. Government should be you. And that's exactly what it should be. And sometimes it kind of gets away and imposes upon the citizens they pontificate upon the citizens how things should be. That isn't always the case, but in many respects that is. And when we get to transportation, sometimes I feel like that's it, because we're told what's right for us, but not necessarily what we maybe want. Now, let me get back on my notes a bit. When we talk about any big thing, and transportation is big, it should follow a policy, whatever that policy is. And governments have policies, whatever they are, and those policies should be reflective of the citizens. And you individually have policies, and at an individual level tends to be value-based. And so I don't really get to go very far in my life without someone asking me my opinion on Columbia River Crossing.
Thanks for looking at me.
I'm looking at you, and
Let me
so,
ask, what do you think about Columbia River
well,
Crossing?
before I get there, and it's up in the news again, but before I get there, let me see a show of hands. Who supports Columbia River Crossing, the bridge as is? Who supports that? Does anybody here? Who is opposed to you?
I would support the bridge in some portion. I'm not sure I support all of what's going on with it, but I think we need to do something.
Exactly.
In some form.
Exactly, we need a new bridge.
In some, okay, so you recognize that there's an issue, but what does the solution look like? And who is opposed to it?
The bridge,
The
design.
The Columbia River Crossing
In
as
its present
is.
form.
Okay, in present form. And that's what I get is most people, not most, well, a lot, believe something should be done, but this isn't it. And that's kind of where I fall at, is something needs to be improved for the corridor, but this project isn't it. Now, in 2 words or less, who raised their hand? Someone over here opposed, you.
605 freeway.
No, 2 words or less. Tell me your primary reason why you oppose it.
Because I think we should have a bridge that's built.
2 words.
Oh,
Make it work.
farther west.
Okay, all right, so, okay, and you?
Mine is height limitations.
Okay, and so who supported it? And
Well,
well, an improvement, so
I support it, but what I don't agree with is the pork.
So 2 words or less, why do you support it? 2 words or less, why do you oppose it?
I support it because it's needed. I oppose it because of the pork that's hooked to it.
You mean we've already spent $200 million on it?
Yeah, exactly.
We don't have it.
Just in
yet.
design.
$2 million a month we're running.
Well, I don't
We're told
understand
it's $2
why-
million a month right now to just.
Why part of the bridge is buying land in Hood River for that kind of thing.
I can't, oh, Eric, go ahead.
Light rail.
Well,
Do
you,
without it.
why you oppose?
Oppose light rail.
You oppose light rail. Now, why do you oppose light rail?
It's expensive. Steel wheels are beaten by rubber wheels all the time. And in Washington County, when we spent $170 to $200 million on the choo-choo, that slows me down in Beaverton to go to Tualatin, and that it would be cheaper to put 10 people in a limousine with champagne to take them from Beaverton to Tualatin.
Here, all right.
Enough said.
Here.
And they should step
How
down
much rail
the
is in East
road.
Coast and how it works?
What's that?
Have you ever been in East Coast and how much rail is back there and how it works?
And it works because
Yeah, but
there's
it's
density
designed
we don't have.
different, they're not.
And we're gonna get into that a bit, and what, you wanted to say something?
I can't think of 2 words, but I'm just thinking from the input that I've had, it doesn't carry, the conveyance doesn't improve what you've already got.
Okay, so all of you are now
Make it 8
qualified to be legislators, because Because you all have
thank
a,
you.
well, I agree. When I was on the planning commission, perhaps I was demoted to the state legislature. But actually, it was a very good experience, and I learned a lot. But one of the things sitting on the planning commission that I learned is how everything is interrelated. Nothing happens in a vacuum. You can't have transportation without livability, and you can't have livability without proper land use planning, and you can't have proper land use planning if you don't have public safety, and you can't have, you know, all of these public safety issues unless you've got a good education system, because then everybody eventually ends up in the jail, and on and on and on. So everything is interwoven. That's one thing I learned. Now, Columbia River Crossing, when I talked about policies and then personal values, what was interesting to me, there's a beautiful side to Columbia River Crossing, no matter how that happens. Jefferson Smith, who ran for mayor of Portland, you might remember. Jefferson is about as progressive on one side of the political ledger as I might be conservative on the other side. And yet we've worked together a lot on Columbia River Crossing and challenging. And it's because some people, particularly in the Portland area, the majority of the opposition is based on environmental reasons, not financial. They like light rail, but they're challenged by the environmental issues with that, either growth, putting more, as they perceive, more cars, congestion issues, asthma, things like that. So they have those value statements, those individuals, and they're motivated by that. Now, that's not the only reason why some of those folks oppose, but that's a big reason why. And then you've got over on the conservative side of the ledger, people are opposed either one because the public transportation element of it, and they wish they chose something different. They don't mind public transportation, but they wished it was rubber wheels rather than fixed rail. Or someone like me who looked at the numbers and said these numbers just really don't pencil out. This is problematic. And so you had opposition for different reasons on the right side. And what we found is when these opposites have common goals, when you put them together, there's a very mighty voice and a very strong voice on transportation. Now, fluoride, funny you brought that up. Fluoride is another example. You had on the granola side of the political ledger, people who wanted to be more natural and not have fluoride in their water and all those other things. And then you had, I'll say, the more libertarian side of the ledger who said, just don't be putting things in my mouth for me. I have freedom, and on and on. And both may be right or wrong, but they're traditionally, historically opposite sides of the political ledger, and they came together because they had common values, and they worked together, and you saw what happened with fluoride. Whether you agree or disagree, that's just kind of what happened. And I wish that we more looked at not so much what our differences are, but what's our common goal and how can we go about it. Now, Columbia River Crossing specifically, how many of you were reading the news yesterday about it, or Facebook? We're friends on Facebook, aren't we? I think we are. You've been reading about it yesterday?
My take is that I'm hearing signals via layers of people that it's dead because Washington is not going to support it financially, and the governor has kind of put a book in and say that we're putting money in there, but it's not anyway. It's like $45 million or $90 million to continue the study, but they're not going to fund it. So this hard close that everybody's, that the powers that be who want it are trying to play on the citizens looks like it's going to get shot down, but I think we're going to find out shortly because the session ends on Tuesday. So we should find out then.
Yes.
Is the Coast Guard public hearing gonna be a detriment to the CRC? I'm sort of thinking that it is because of the height restriction.
So a couple things happened yesterday, and then today actually it's kind of silent all of a sudden, but yesterday was a hot Columbia River Crossing day. So the Coast Guard's been having hearings the 4th and the 5th. Today, is that right, the 4th and the 5th? I don't
Maybe
think
today also.
I think there might be one today as well. And they're looking, the Coast Guard has to issue a permit to make sure that the bridge is not going to interfere with water commerce at all, the commerce on the river. That could be a stopping point. We've got a couple things. One is who has the supreme authority over the Coast Guard? And that's not clear. The White House has sent signals that, you know, they said a while ago, this is, you know, we're expediting this. But George Bush's administration also said, we're expediting the Columbia River crossing, and it didn't happen, and we're now a second term into our next president. So we don't know how the White House figures into the authority for the Coast Guard permit. That's kind of out there. Jamie Herrera Butler, Congresswoman from Washington, sits on the Ways and Means Transportation Committee, and she got a budget note put in there yesterday, which is no small thing, which says, "Dear Coast Guard, do not issue a permit if it's going to impact the economics of upriver." And then this Tuesday morning, Monday, the state of Oregon and Washington, some of you to catch up, there's 3 businesses that are upriver from the bridge that manufacture different things that need a higher height. 2 of them have entered into a mitigation agreement with the states, that if they build a Columbia River crossing, the bridge height is too low, that they're going to economically be reimbursed for it. The exact terms of the deal, I don't believe have been made public, and the business is made whole, but we have no assurances that the employees that will be impacted through loss of opportunity and jobs will, I mean, how do those people provide for their families, how are they going to be compensated? And then we have the 3rd business who was at the Coast Guard hearing saying, help us, throw us a bone, don't do this to us. Government happening to them and not having them be part of it. So the Washington legislature, here's the other thing, each state has to pony up $450 million in commitment to it in order for this $3.6 billion before cost overruns. They each have to pony up $450 million and commit to it. And the reason for why it needs to happen now is that there's this sale going on, and if I'm talking cynically, it's because I am. There's a push saying that the states, the Columbia River Crossing, have to actually get this application, grant application in the 3rd quarter of 2013 to the federal government in order to get approval on the federal funding that we need for Columbia River Crossing to happen. And if we don't make the grant this 3rd quarter of 2013, then basically we're thrown in with all the rest of the lamer projects across the United States, and we have to compete with all these projects and we may not get the money. And that's what's being told. You've got to do it now. And when that was explained to an oversight committee in the state of Washington, one of their legislators responded when they said, you've got to do it now, because if you don't do it now, the money won't be there tomorrow. And he says, I've heard that said at a car dealership. If you don't buy now, the deal's not going to be here tomorrow. So I will say my participation in Columbia River Crossing when I was in the legislature, Columbia River Crossing had been poised as a job creator, and it is. It will create some jobs. It will create 2,000 jobs a year for 10 years to build it, and that's a job creator. It will also displace jobs. And so when you look at the net jobs, it's fuzzy to get a handle on the net jobs, also fuzzy to get a handle on the permanent job creation. So there's pros and cons from a job perspective, and I was able to put the brakes on it in the legislature and stop the Republicans from going down, and at least enough to put the brakes on and say, let's talk about the numbers. So as a result, we started the Legislative Oversight Committee, which met. Did you come and testify at that?
Yeah.
Because if I asked you, did you feel heard? What do you think your answer would be?
Nope.
That they're going to do what they're going to do, right? And that part I might agree with you on that one and say that's probably how a lot of people felt. After January, I went to the legislature in February, I think it was, and I testified in front of the Oversight Committee as a citizen, and I was only given 3 minutes. Someone who had really drilled on this issue, and I didn't feel heard. In fact, I felt that it was a done deal. I knew it was a done deal. And that isn't okay when you've got a room full of citizens that have been involved and engaged in the conversation for years, that they walk away not feeling heard. So that was one of those things. You wanted to ask something?
What's the problem with getting it to a height that works?
There's some competing issues. So the bridge is really a very minor part. And if the crowd, if you folks want to take this in the direction of CRC, I'm happy to go there. I just don't want it, if you want a broader scope of transportation, I'm also happy to talk about that too. But with Columbia River Crossing, the bridge is actually a very small part of the project. Columbia River Crossing actually also includes 5 or 7 interchanges, on and off ramps in Washington and Oregon. and it includes light rail. Light rail is about $1 billion of the project. And so the reason why that's important is there's also the Pearson Airport on the Washington side. So the bridge height, if you go up higher, there's two problems potentially with that. The Columbia River Crossing Project folks say that if you go up higher, it doesn't really impact Pearson Airport. It's not really, that's not really the issue. But some people are skeptical and say that has an impact because it gets into their airspace. But the real issue is when you go up higher, and light rail's part of it, the actual light rail can't make the grade from there unless they take the wings of it out into Washington, Oregon, and mellow it out a bit. When they do that, that is a substantial change because then not only the interchanges that they need help with are impaired and going to have to now be at a higher and rework it all, but it's also going to take some physical footprint further out, north and south of it, where they didn't look for easements or condemnation of property, so on and so forth, so it really changes the picture. That's why the height is cannot easily just be raised.
Why, I haven't read in the paper or heard on TV, why can't it be another drawbridge? Is it because with extra lanes and light rail, they don't want to interrupt the traffic?
So,
A drawbridge or whatever.
that is such an obvious question. And the answer is startling. So, initially, before the bridge height became an issue, one of the main reasons why they needed a new bridge is because the drawbridge stops traffic too long. And it also causes safety issues. And so one of the absolute main reasons why they needed to change the bridge altogether was the drawbridge issue. Now, the conversation changed. When the height is too low, all of a sudden, Columbia River Crossing is saying, well, we might be able to mitigate it by making it a drawbridge. And so it was laughable. And so that's kind of, I haven't heard that recently. So I don't think that's part of the solution now. You and then you. Yes.
Well, like what's the new bridge? What's the
205?
What's the cost
Fremont.
differentials between the state of Fremont and 205 bridge, number one? The Fremont Bridge, of course, is double deck,
Yeah.
but a light rail doesn't need anywhere near the kind of heights as does a 14-foot high semi.
I don't know the difference in height between the
Put
two.
the train down below.
Well, the train down below, it's still, the bottom has to be, it has to be at the 100, I think they're currently at 116 feet. That still doesn't provide the clearance on the Columbia River. And the Glen Jackson is 178 or 185. Those two numbers stick out in my head, but it's around there. It's quite high.
That's
It-
cool.
That's right next to the airport, why is that?
Well, flight paths, I don't know where it is underneath the flight paths, but it also doesn't have light rail on it.
No.
So it
So-
can have more curvature this way.
Potentially, yeah. And so I don't know the rise of it on either side in comparison to the
Where's this
airport.
airport at?
It's on in the Vancouver side.
Yeah.
Right.
Fort Vancouver,
Fort Vancouver, right next to.
right next
So
to
it's
the
west of the
Highway
bridge.
14.
By the way, in the budget, Fort Vancouver's getting a new museum. Yes.
You mentioned this one representative mentioned that, like a car salesman with that particular option. Well, we've been working on this project for many, many years. I think that date had been mandated quite a while ago, or am I wrong?
Which date?
The date that they had to have it through the government to get the permits in.
No, the date would, that is a fairly recent date. It's not, yeah, it's not permits, it's a fairly recent date because of the recent being maybe 2 years or so, 3 years. And it has to do with the securing at the federal level that there'll be a bucket of money available and then securing our place in line for it once we submit a grant. The other part of it is that in order to submit the grant, we have a checklist of things that we need to do. One of them is the NEPA process. Are you familiar with what that is? It's the, environmental protection application, permit application. It's an environmental permit, I forget what the N stands for, and it takes a long process. And what they have to do is make sure the environmental impact of the project. And also what it requires is all the agencies to actually sign off on it. So Metro had to sign off, City of Portland, County, all this kind of stuff. In order to get all that approval done, there was also some discussion of what's the final project going to look like. And so there's thinking that some agency says, well, absolutely, we're not going to approve it unless light rail's on it. And that's how light rail came about. There's other people that say, no, light rail has to be part of it in order to get the funding, on and on. And so there's a lot of people that have been involved along the way, and if you talk to some people who have been historians of this project, that when they had these steering-like committees, and this isn't the exact term, they had steering-like committees who challenged it, they kind of did away with that and got a new committee, and so on and so forth. And the other interesting thing that's telling about this project is when the project started to face some pushback from the community, rather than hiring engineers to figure out how to improve the project, they hired PR firms to sell the project. And you look at that, and you look at the history of it, and that's what I mean by pushback. Now, I can look at the numbers, and as a CPA, and say, well, as a financial person, look at it and say, my goodness, this is really challenging. And enough to raise an eyebrow, and enough to say, let's proceed slowly. And then when we look at what are we getting for $3.6 billion, this isn't free money. The money comes from Washington, and anytime you get federal money, you also have to sell your soul a bit too. And so there is no free money, and that money from Washington is coming from us as well, and from the rest of the nation. Then our $450 million will be through bonding that ODOT will go out, sell bonds for $450 million to pay for it, and then we have to pay it back. And what they did in the Oregon legislature is they said, we say we're going to give the $450 million if all these other things are in place. Washington has to approve it, that's one of them. But what they didn't do in the bill is they didn't talk about how they were going to pay that $450 million back, which means, because they wanted to get away from that conversation, because that would have required, in all likelihood, a conversation about new excise tax or tax increases, and that would have required a supermajority vote. It would have been difficult and perhaps political suicide with a project that it has questionable popularity. And so they held off the payment of the $450 million until later. So they didn't want to take that vote unless they had to. And so they may not have to. Yes?
Can I add one point on that? So 2 or 3, but it's been out 2 or 3 years.
What's been out?
You said that it's been known that the date is 2 or 3 years.
No, I think it's, I don't know when the third quarter 2013 grant date was known. The NEPA project was not, the NEPA application, the record of decision was not given to us by the federal government until December 7th of 2011 was when the federal government approved our NEPA project. And then it has to mature through an appeals process, and so that's kind of gone through. And the application can also have some, can also be slightly amended.
So really there was no postage
No,
date?
no,
But
I don't.
It's not real recent, like in the last 6 months.
No. They've known that they've had to do it in the third quarter for probably at least a year in all likelihood. Let me think, where are we? We're in, I think it was in the 2000, yeah, because I've seen calendars I've seen their anticipated calendar benchmarking of different stages of the process, but the actual third quarter I think is about a year or two old, knowing that it's got to be third quarter 2013. They were hoping to get approval last year or 2011 even, so they've been trying to get it for quite a few years.
I'm curious, how much do you think we should spend for a bridge to go across there? How much money would be the right amount, or do you support a bridge at all?
So, a couple things. One is you brought up about the East Coast and the rails. The rest of the nation is able to do fixed rail work for a lot cheaper than us. Our per mileage is so high to put in fixed rail. And we subsidize, I've got some numbers, and I apologize, I I don't know why I'd mind 8 would be sufficient.
We can
So if
share.
you can share. But I pulled off TriMet's upcoming budget, and some things in there are very interesting for trending. But fixed rail is heavily subsidized as well, fixed light rail, heavily subsidized. The ridership only pays about 30% or so of the actual cost. And I don't know if you saw in today's, it just came out this afternoon, an article that Joseph Rose, how many of you follow Joseph Rose at all with TriMet? Or he's not with TriMet, he's with Oregonian, who follows transportation and reports on it. Oregon lawmakers called for a full state audit of TriMet finances and operations. So TriMet is financially, and they have some financial struggles. When you look at their, I only pulled out some pages of their budget that I'll talk about. With TriMet, one of the things that they have is, like most government agencies, perhaps the only legal entity beast in the accounting world that is able to have off-balance sheet debt and not have to record it. We extrapolated, I spoke on a bill in 2011. TriMet has not retirement, but other post-employment benefits. They, at that time, Cascade Policy did some data, and they estimated about $805 million off-balance sheet debt. That's for the luxurious medical plan and such that TriMet has agreed to their employees. So when they retire, they're covered for full health insurance for them and their families. $805 million. What this bill did is said, okay, TriMet needs a plan, a rehabilitation plan here. And it said if you're a government agency and you're in this boat, that you have to pay, and the bill just arbitrarily threw out 1/25 of that debt a year, and benchmarked from the last day of the last fiscal year. At least pay something towards this debt. That debt is not put anywhere on their financial statements. I met with the CFO who recently left TriMet. I met with the CFO of TriMet. And she says, Katie, because TriMet is heavily funded on bonding, right? So they go out to Wall Street, and Wall Street pays them some money on bonding. She says, Katie, if we were to put that, if we were to recognize it on our balance sheet and put that on our balance sheet, it would impact our bond rating. We can't do that. Well, maybe it should impact the bond rating. And that was her words. And I get that, because that impacts their ability to go and do the projects. And I understand that. But the other thing that should not be missed is that TriMet's not alone, although they maybe perhaps have the largest unfunded liability for non-retirement debts of any of the agencies in the state of Oregon. But people underwriting the bonds, if they don't already account for this off-balance sheet, then they're complicit in the financial concerns that we have with agencies like TriMet. So I don't know if they'll be audited, but this was fast-tracked, the article says, so it came up and it's being fast-tracked. And when something gets fast-tracked this late in the legislative session, that means that there's some political will to do it. And there's a laundry list, and the article's very good. I urge you at home or tomorrow, and I imagine it'll be in the paper tomorrow, to look through it. It just kind of highlights a little bit of the list of issues that TriMet's dealing with. And that's no small thing, because that impacts public transportation. And the main part of Columbia River Crossing is that light rail.
Katie, there was a question in the
Oh,
card from Harris Tech,
sure.
and would you take that, please?
Sure.
Going back to the height of the bridge, is that not in the direct line of the flight plan for the Portland airport?
I have never heard that Portland Airport's airspace was impaired by it.
When it was coming east, anyway.
Well, if they do come along the river, they're at a height.
I think they're probably higher, and I don't know if they'd be north or south of it either. But I've never heard Portland Airport having any problem with it.
So that would not interfere if the bridge was higher?
No, I don't. I've not heard that. I don't believe that. But Pearson Airport could be. So, yes.
Two things. One, toll bridge has been discussed, and I like that idea. What's your opinion, and what is the likelihood that the legislatures may go for that? And secondly, and you may not know about this, I've heard, and it may not be correct, or it may only technically be correct, but I've heard that TriMet has the most generous benefits of a public transport agency in the U.S. Is that true?
Yes.
Do.
Yes. And that is why this $800 million off-balance sheet debt is there, is because of the benefits. And this article touches on that the generosity of the benefits is also part of what's been stalling the labor negotiations.
So that's been going on over 2 years.
So a few years ago, the legislature voted on something. I don't fully understand it, but what I believe it said is that they voted on a bill that said that basically the TriMet union, if there's no contract, if the contract's not renewed, the current contract stays in place. And so what that's done is the union has been in a strong position because the current contract maintains in place until the new contract is negotiated. The union has stayed in a strong position to continue on the contract. They have perhaps a luxury of time to negotiate on behalf of their employees. So they're doing what they feel is in the best interest of their employees, and they don't feel a sense of urgency to negotiate, where TriMet is feeling some urgency. And so now what we've got are these two sides having difficulty meeting, and the longstanding 2 years of this existing contract that no longer exists but still applies, part of the labor negotiations. That's one of the major issues for having a look at the audit. And you are correct about that. Matter of fact, that bill I brought up, it wasn't my bill, but I spoke to it. The sponsor of the bill was traveling at that time, so I pinch hitted for it. And TriMet was not expecting to have to come up and talk on the bill. The committee requested, the TriMet lobbyist was in the audience, requested that she come up here, and I feel so terrible for her because I think she was kind of caught off guard. And she came up there and they asked her to talk about, well, you know, why do you have this amount of debt? And she said, and she's a very nice woman, she says, well, because we have a very generous package for our employees. We take care of them. And I think that, you know, that's something that an employer should be proud of, but if they can afford it, that's great. But if they can't afford it, and if it's a public agency paid for by taxpayers, maybe that should be taught.
But hasn't management voted themselves like some 15% raises and stuff like that? Has anybody in here ever got a 15% raise?
That talks about this too.
They're the highest paid in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
It was in, so I went to TriMet and talked about that budget last year. I talked before them and said, can you please just come up with a plan of rehabilitation for your agency, please? Because the community depends. I mean, they're a very important part of our community. And the community depends on you, but we need you to be financially viable. Can you please come up with a plan? Well, there were a bunch of folks there to talk about ridership, and at the time they had declining ridership. The ridership, if you look at those numbers, has gone slightly back up, and I'll walk through on some of these numbers with you. But they don't know how to rehabilitate themselves at this point financially, partially because they've got so many balls up in the air. But that specific budget had a line item that the board says now, they knew that raises were in there, but the line item didn't specifically say management raises in there. So, yeah, and so I'm not going to say that that was wrong to give them raises, as much as I'm going to say that that's a public trust issue at the very least. That the public felt, that if the people that were there, I think probably if they didn't know it was in there, they would have spoke to it if they knew. It's a public trust issue at that point.
Well, it's good to be king, it just proves it.
And cash is king too, so you gotta have cash to be king, and not somebody else's cash.
As much as I enjoy beating up on TriMet.
I don't mean to beat up on them, I think that they need
How
some.
much is, you said 3.5 billion is a lot of money, you don't understand. How much is the right amount?
Oh, and back to your question.
Yeah.
So as far as what a bridge goes, I don't know what the right answer is, and I'm not even sure that a replacement bridge is the right answer. I don't think I know what the answer is, as much as the financial modeling has to be right. And
I do like Rex's idea, 605.
Yeah. 605 freeway.
That's not gonna solve TriMet's problems, though.
Oh, we don't care about TriMet.
Yeah,
Well,
TriMet,
see,
the whole
now-
problem in it.
if you talk to Washington, TriMet shouldn't be part of this conversation.
Yeah, because they keep voting down the light rail, so why do they want to still put it
They
there?
do. So Washington has a different viewpoint. What's interesting is on the Oregon side, it's not a Republican-Democrat thing on the Oregon side. As much as some people are saying, I can honestly tell you it's not a Republican-Democrat thing on the Oregon side. On the Oregon side, it's I don't know that many people that support it. People either feel very strongly against it, or they just kind of don't have a strong feeling at all about it. They just, you know. On the Washington side, And it seems to be a Democrat-Republican thing for some reason, although I think that's kind of changing. So it's interesting how each of the states are. And when I first got involved with Columbia River Crossing, I was in a split house. We had 30 Republicans and 30 Democrats. And so we were forced to get along. I've never been in the legislature before or since then. That's all I know, and you have to act like grown-ups. And so, we, you know, I don't know what it's like to be in a, outside of that. Let me, I just handed you TriMet. This isn't to beat up on TriMet at all. This is to explain how important they are. Okay, I've got you, and then we got to move. Yes.
So, on Exhibit 1, if you go down to fiscal year 12, it looks like in 40 years, the boarding rides divided by the capital has tripled, or tripled, from $20.40 to $61.11. Is that saying every ride costs $61?
I don't think that is necessarily, I don't know what that column is stating, and I'm not sure it's dollars.
Right, I'll drive it.
I think that that's,
Eric's right.
I think that's 61.11 people per something.
Okay.
I don't think that's dollars. And let's go through these exhibits, and I'll tell you what I wanted to highlight from them. In the first exhibit on TriMet, the first column talks about their ridership numbers through the different years, this first column. And you can see back if you start at 08 and go to 09, you still see it continuing to grow. Then you see in 10 it drops. And 11, it grew a little bit, but not back up to its highest, and now 12 it's back up.
Gas prices.
Well, that, people are traveling less because they have jobs to go to, on and on, but I mean, so for declining ridership, I mean, there's various reasons why.
Didn't they raise their rates quite a bit? Or?
So,
About $100 for a bus pass.
so if you go over to the second page, if you look in the second column down here, let's look at the same years. Even though this column is the passenger revenue from passengers, even though the ridership went down and is slightly back up, but not as high as it was before, and now it's higher, notice how the revenue's always increased, regardless of ridership going up and down. And when I spoke at TriMet's budget meeting last year, the riders, so ridership's changing, but the revenues from passengers are always going up. So there is some kind of relationship of some sort between what they're charging and ridership. You know, if ridership is going down, they're raising rates, or maybe rates always need to go up, and they do it at enough of a whatever financial pace to outrun any deficit, more deficit than they already have. I don't know, but it's interesting how the revenue always goes up regardless of the fluctuation in the riders. So now back to your question, a little bit of what you're talking about. The far right column, well, this column to the far right of that, not the percentage, well, the first percentage one, it's titled Pass Rev divided by system cost. 30%, 30.23% in the most recent 2012 year, passenger revenue pays for 30% of the ride, and 70% is subsidized from other sources. Now, if you look back into the early years, it was 60 to 50% or so of the rides were paid for by passengers, and the rest was subsidized. So,
That's not sustainable.
well, you must be financially conservative, or at least have a brain. And I don't. What?
There's a debate on the brain, Kate.
Okay, but you have a heart, don't you?
I do, yeah.
Okay, Ed, yes.
One thing to keep in mind is when TriMet took over the Fort Wayne Bus Company, the Fort Wayne Bus Company was almost profitable.
What year was that, Ed?
Probably, what, 70 or so.
So that's because this goes back to 72, and I didn't know the history, and that's probably when they started taking over. So they started out almost profitable, and then just, now they're kind of back up though, because in the down around there, they were in the mid-20s for a long time of passengers paying for it. And now we're back up to 30%, so we're good. Over there, you?
That's my comment. You're talking about CRC, you're talking about TriMet. I also want to bring in Wes.
Oh, okay.
We're looking at west going south. We looking at Washingtonians not wanting tri-met or light rail over there, even though they put it there. Are we going to get the passengers, or are we got another west? Because right now, how much are we really? I mean, even the yellow line.
You mean up to,
Going
what are
north.
we gonna get up to Washington?
Yeah, we put a
Yeah.
line across the bridge with CRC. We drop it down into Vancouver. Fine, we have the yellow line going over there and coming back. You know, before the only thing I can think of is Paul Bunyan's statue. After that, you don't really have any traffic due to the fact that you're going out in an industrial region. People aren't going to be riding Max, don't ride Max to there unless they're going out to the Expo or they're going out to the PIR. And that's not often. So going all the way north, you're going to have an empty train, similar to west going south, where we're paying, what, $11 a head? Or is it up to 18, 17?
So let's see the smarty pants here. Who knows how many engineers are on each west train?
This is an engineer to conductor, right? Because it's, or a heavy rail.
Yes, it's not quite heavy, but it's
But it has to
like a
withstand
mid,
the
but
impact.
exactly, so it has a federal engineer or conductor, and then it has our tri-met representative as well. And when someone said that to me, I said, oh, so there's more to them than passengers. But some people actually ride it though. I mean, it is ridden, but it's not paying for itself. And I'm, a Hillsborough person, and so I remember '98 when Max went out to Hillsborough. It took a few years for ridership to get up there, and that's one of those things, if time permits, we'll talk about is the
Yeah, but that's the only one that works, is east-west.
It does. I rode it yesterday to Portland. Was down there all
Well, it's
day
fine,
and came back.
It's the
But
only one that works, though.
So the airport works. You wouldn't believe how many people ride that
Well,
rail.
that-
yeah.
the airport one works. My brother flew in from Arizona last week, and I said, I'm busy. Can you ride it out to Hillsborough? So it's just, he gets to view all Tri-County. Well, I don't think he's in Clackamas at that point. But
Tiger and Sherwood won't work, Milwaukee won't work.
so the good news for you is that, I don't know if it's good news, but what's planned over in Washington is light rail. But the governor, I was appointed by the governor to the Leadership Commission. I don't think I'm on it now, but I don't know. But I don't get invited to the meetings anymore because I'm not a legislator. Put me on the Leadership Commission for rapid rail, which is heavy rail, to go from Eugene to Portland. And what's interesting about that is there's also a rapid rail project coming from Seattle. I don't know if it's north of Seattle down to Portland, but we are in charge of that in Oregon. Washington is, and they're going to hook over into Portland. When I got appointed to this leadership commission, this new leadership commission, the very first meeting we were in there, I quickly learned that there was a whole history behind this project. And the Leadership Commission was not designed, by this time, by the way, I had already been rabble-rousing on Columbia River Crossing, so I think that the idea was to get me involved and invested in the game so I didn't raise problems later. And so when I sat on this commission, the question was not, should we be doing this? The question is, we're going to do it, how are we going to do it? And that's a completely different question. There was a whole lot of history behind there. Now, what's also happening in the federal government, the heavy rail system, was always controlled by the federal government and the planning of it. The federal government somehow is allowing them to be more grant writers, and that the more the local jurisdictions will do the rapid rail planning. And so that's kind of new for everybody. But it was amazing to me the amount of work that had already been done and the decisions that had previously been made. And the other thing that's interesting is now I have to think back on the titles here, but the commission not facilitator, I think it's the facilitator of the commission. We needed to hire someone to be the facilitator for the commission. We also needed a consultant for this. Columbia River Crossing has a consultant, a very reputable company, David Evans and Associates, very reputable company, but they're the consultants on Columbia River Crossing. What was interesting to me is the facilitators that we as a commission got to choose from were also employees of the consultant for this leadership commission. And it it makes me kind of wonder about degrees of separation. I'll just leave that at that. So, now, if we flip to the next page, Exhibit 3, employer taxes. This again is with TriMet. The first column is a tax rate that's applied. Now, how many of you are aware that employers in TriMet actually pay an employment tax? Okay. They pay it on the employees.
I wrote a check.
You wrote a check? You must have employees, or are you self-employed?
Self-employed.
So good, you made money. Yay. That's good. You only pay if you're profitable. So, so looking at the rate, you'll see how they have steadily rised, but they've stayed stagnant at each level for a number of years. And you'll see, starting in '05, how they start raising a little bit every year, and that's what we're in. The TriMet's come to the legislature and said, can we get an increase every year if we actually increase, what do they call it, increase services. So I proposed a bill in 2011 to clarify what increased services mean, and that it's increased services on some kind of benchmarking. To me, it means that we're moving people around more. In fact, they've declined their bus services. They've been working on fixed rail, and at the time, ridership was going down. So how are services being increased? Yet the employers were being required to pay an additional tax. That didn't go very well. When you come up against certain things like that, the lobbyists are very strong, that we pay for. The government paid lobbyists are very strong to tell us that that's not a good idea. So we're trending on increases from employer taxes, and a lot of employees don't realize that. So employers pay that because they get back the benefit of being able to get transportation to customers or employees, or freeing up the roads so their freight has more opportunity on the road, so on and so forth. But there is no definition for what increased services mean. Now, looking at the dollars, going 2 columns over, the employer tax, municipal and private, you can see how that's increasing. It had a little dip in 2010, much like riders did. And that tells me also that a lot of the ridership decline might have been because there were also less employees using it and less employees to pay taxes on. But the employers pay a lot of tax, $226 million in 2012. So the employers in the TriMet area paid that. But one of the things that a lot of folks don't realize is that employers pay this tax for TriMet services, but they also pay again in lots of different ways. And one of them is, how many of your employers do you get a TriMet card for the year through your employer? So what happens, if employers can apply with TriMet for a transit card for their employees. And what TriMet does is they take a survey of the employees of that group or that employer, and they estimate, okay, certain number of employees travel it every day, other employees are occasional, and so on and so forth. And then they come up with a rate, and the employer will buy a card for every one of their employees at a certain rate. So employers also, if you get one of those cards, and a lot of employees do this, if you get one of those cards, your employer's also paying for their employees to ride. Discounted in all likelihood. One employee might be a heavy rider, one might never ride, except maybe do a Blazers game or something, which is a good thing to do if you go to a Blazers game.
Or to the Rose Parade.
Or to the Rose Parade, or Timbers game. Go Timbers.
Yes.
Rose City till I die.
Orange,
Have you gone?
not yet.
I haven't gone. I've just heard incredible things about them. And I love the Timbers. So the other thing that large employers do, we have Intel. Intel actually, as an example, has a shuttle that they pay for themselves to go pick up their employees getting off at the TriMet stations and take them back to their plant or their offices. And so Intel is already paying the payroll tax, but then they're paying additional to get people moving through public transport. And so I think it's important for citizens to realize that it isn't, it's not just the employer tax that they're paying, they're also subsidizing in other ways. Now, smaller employers may not be subsidizing as much. So that's, with TriMet, and this isn't to disparage TriMet, it's to say TriMet is an extremely necessary part of our community. I am not an environmental motivated person. So I'm not, my decisions aren't motivated by the environment necessarily, although I was just in Charleston. And did you know they had no recycle bins for your water bottles or soda cans? And how many of you have traveled where there's no recycle bins and you feel like you're sinning when you have to, exactly. So I think I'm more environmentally sensitive than I give myself credit for. But I'm not motivated by that. But I recognize a lot of my community is. And so when I make decisions, I must be mindful of that value statement. And so public transportation, not my issue with Columbia River Crossing. A lot of people are absolutely irate that public transportation is on, that light rail's on there. That isn't my issue. My issue is the financial imprudence of it and the impact it has on the project. And so, if it's important to someone else, I'm fine with it, but it still has to be fiscally sound. Now, other people might feel strongly. So, you talked about tolling, right? Was it you who asked about tolling? Washington State has a law where they have to get special legislative approval for tolling. Oregon does not. That tolling can happen. So we aren't as sensitive to it. The Washington legislature tried to send it to their traffic commission or transportation commission that they then could decide if tolling was going to happen or not. So the legislature tried to send that. They created a bill, passed it, that said the transportation commission would decide if tolling could happen. Someone challenged in the court and it was kicked out and said, no, the legislature has to do it. The reason for it is the legislature didn't want to take the political hit on putting tolling because it's very unpopular in Washington.
Two little things. Isn't there a problem with the Fed that you can't put it on the I-2 without bridge to it?
The problem, there's a different problem with that, is we can't authorize tolling on it. The federal government has to.
The other thing, on the Evergreen Bridge in Seattle, going across, they projected that bridge, and it's up there, would be 10 years to pay off that bridge. It took 4 years. 4 years.
From tolling.
Tolling.
From tolling.
And there's been other bridges,
What was the cost?
All your topics have been great and insightful, but can you shed some light on Washington County?
There, well,
Yes.
There, we don't have a lot of time left, so I mean.
Okay.
This is where I live.
In
and where I
about
drive.
10 minutes.
This is
West
where
side,
which west side?
west side bypass.
So, remember how I told you that there's people with different values? What do you think the chances of West Side bypass happening?
0.
Of me finding my frog in my backyard a lot better. And I'm not looking.
And you're not looking. So that's a big part, and it's interesting because West Side bypass comes up often in conversation with Columbia River Crossing. Now, I'm going to be honest with you when I tell you I do not have as big a handle on Washington County specific transportation, and I'm sorry that disappoints you. Because I don't think I could be talking with much information on it.
But like Amber Glen's been in the news lately because once everybody's going like, oh, it could be a car-free thing and all this, but well, we really are gonna have to build an expensive, multi-story car facility.
Okay.
We don't really wanna do that. There's all this whining around about it. Build flat ranch houses in there and get it done with.
So okay, let me put on, this is another topic I've got down here to prove it here. Actually, it was one of the first things I was going to talk about was land use and transportation and the intermix of it. Yes, you could be a planning commission. You could be dynamic.
I'm battery driven.
Yeah, that's right.
He's too much of a hard nose.
Well,
I don't behave well in public meetings.
so you mentioned ranch houses. Have you seen a ranch house built recently?
No.
Unless you have property somewhere.
Yes.
You have seen where was the ranch house?
Now, what do you mean, you mean a ranch house?
One
like-
floor, one
One
story.
level.
Like your house.
One level.
One story.
Cooper Manor.
Yeah, Cooper Mountain,
Cooper Mountain recently.
Pretty rare.
yes. Well, I get the land use applications for this CPO district, and yeah, we have, large houses being built, on Cooper Mountain is one of the main places.
And one story.
But they have to be a good sized property. Property is quite a bit bigger size.
Yeah.
And they're.
You're not gonna see it in a development.
Those are high-end ranch houses though, right?
Yeah, very
No,
But
expensive.
it's still ranch
I thought
houses.
that's what she meant.
I did mean, well, I meant just a ranch house, not on a ranch, just
Right.
A one-story, yeah,
Single-family detached,
right,
Yeah.
and
exactly.
not real high density.
Well, density, see, that's the same question though, that's the same issue, and that's why most of us have not seen it recently. So we have, with our urban growth boundary, what's interesting to me is people, particularly your children, if they travel around, it'll be news, well, they maybe don't even know there's an urban growth boundary. But the urban growth boundary is somewhat unique to our area. It doesn't happen in other cities. And if you go into Washington, they don't have it. Their land use planning model is entirely different, which I believe is also part of the reason.
urban growth boundaries.
Well, but it's different though.
It is differently applied,
It's very differently applied, and I believe that the planning difference in Washington State is part of the reason for the Columbia River crossing, because to allow us to plan land use regionally. But land use, we have density requirements that we need in our region to maintain our urban growth boundary. Well, the vacant land is out in the, not in downtown Portland, the vacant land is out here. So who has to make up for the density that now has to be impressed upon the region? And that's those areas that have land. And in Hillsborough, we have to come up with an average of 10 units per acre, residential units per acre. So what does that happen when we have homes that are on larger lots that were built in the 60s? That means the newer lots, to get to that average, have to be condensed. And so now, if you happen to see a subdivision of 7,000 square foot lots, that's huge. We have lots, if we're talking detached, we might have a 2,000 or 3,000 square foot lot, a building envelope, or maybe not a building envelope, a land envelope, and then you've got to put the building in there. That's why you're seeing those 3-story units going up. And it's kind of interesting. Now, when we talk about density, one of the things I want to mention is that we think that we have property rights. Ed, do you have property rights?
Well, we hold title to the property, and we don't really own it.
That gives you the right to pay taxes on it.
Yeah,
That's all.
And we
You
do
don't
have
have
some
property rights for a
property
while.
rights. I mean, we really do have some, but not complete, not extreme. And in that home you were talking about, I don't know if this is true, because I'm not familiar with if they're in Washington County or if they're in a city where you saw, but if they're Washington County, what I would imagine is if they were able to build a ranch home, they probably had to place it on the property, they were required to place it in a portion of the property that allowed for future development to come in, potentially. And I don't know that, but that's my guess.
That's true.
It is true, see, that's my guess. So they can build that home, but they've got to build it in a place that meets with some authority, some approval. And so when we talk about density and land use, you know, we are impacted by transportation, how land use is designed. And I would tell you that a lot of our land use decisions come after the decision on transportation. Transportation is not coming after to meet our land use decisions. And for example, mixed use zones that we have typically are around public transportation. Lack of parking, we're seeing that in Portland now because they're saying the value statement that's going out there, the policy statement is that you don't need cars to live in certain areas, therefore we're building apartments. They're trying to build apartments with no parking. Lot sizes, we just talked about. And cars, depending on where I haven't drilled down the parking lot, but it's less than 2 cars per home are permitted in the new land unit developments. Like 1 at 1.2 or 1.5 or something like that to meet certain ratios that each city and county have to do. Well, how many of you have teenagers? How many of you have had teenagers? Yeah.
Grandchildren are teenagers.
You're great, there you go. And did they have a sense of urgency about driving? Yeah, a lot of them do, and then if you have teenagers in the house at the same time, more than one, it's very difficult for them to share cars, but some teenagers surprise you and they only want mass transit too. So it's kind of different, but
That means you're never gonna leave home.
could be, yeah, could be. And so lack of parking, lot sizes, and where we place industry, industrial lands. Industrial lands tend to be away from mass transportation, public transportation, but close to freeway access. Now, what's interesting about Intel, we had a citizen, someone coming up and talking to us, a gentleman by the name of Dan Bloom, always comes up and talks to us. And he pointed out on Intel, he said something like, and I love Intel, Intel has all these employees, and it's all this growth for Hillsborough, all these employees are living here, we're building these homes in South Hillsborough to put Intel employees in. But if that's true, and because they live in Hillsborough and working in Hillsborough, then why do we have to increase the capacity of the freeway on and off ramps for rush hour at Chute Road on the 26 freeway? I thought, well, that's interesting. It's very interesting.
Because a lot of them live in Vancouver. That's why you need the 605
Well, a
freeway.
lot of them live in southern Washington County.
That's true too.
They live somewhere, but actually a lot of them, I think, live in the Pearl District. And they live in different places, but that's interesting. It's not that that's good or bad, it's more of what's the science behind it. And so the other things, zoning. A lot of those apartments along light rail out on the west side weren't there before light rail. And the zoning, when light rail came in, before the tracks were even laid, the zoning along the line went into density. And that was in matching up with where public transportation was going. Okay, 2 minutes remaining, that's, whew, I thought I only had like 5 minutes of stuff. And so when we have land use and transportation, a lot of times, and I'll also tell you, are you a planner by chance or commissioner?
me?
Yeah.
I'm on the planning commission.
So you know, okay, so validate this for me or disagree with me. I believe in the planning world that it's almost heretical to say that public transportation isn't the be-all and end-all to every community you build.
Do you think that's true or not? Is that,
My experience is that it's almost a shame factor, like you would never publicly state that public transportation is not always fit.
Amongst planners, that's what most planners believe, that's what.
That's what I'm saying, and in the planning commission world. Do you believe that, or, I mean, as far as experience?
Well, especially in this community, where they're building, that's the model that apparently we've chosen to go, is
Public transportation.
to put the most density around the transportation.
yeah, that's what we've been zoning lately, and that's also what a lot of the construction has been.
And we had an issue up by 170th and Baseline, and the community right next door is on the tracks basically. And they did like a little survey. It was built so that people could use max tracks. There's all these little, file cabinet
yes.
houses. And some of these houses have 5 to 6 cars registered there. So unless you can change people, then you can do all this planning, and people are still gonna do what they wanna do. So what do you do,
And that's-
legislate them?
Well, but that's part of it, because like, for example, the behavior of people is different and out of sync with the behavior of land usages, for example, allowable parking, and all of a sudden, now land use is put on there to change people's behavior based on transportation. And that's what I'm saying, the interplay between transportation and land use is overlapping. Yes, and then you're probably gonna kick me out.
Just a quick comment and between land use and transportation, because I see it, it's here in our community. There is 3 major malls, and that is it. And so how do you get to them? You have to drive. I mean, even from my house, which is on 180th, the nearest one is over a mile away, which is on 185th. So therefore, a bicycle. I'm supposed to go shopping. When my wife goes shopping, I am carrying at least 12 bags into the house.
On a bicycle.
On a bicycle, I'm gonna carry that back.
Hire a trailer.
Shop.
But
I'm
you,
gonna jump in and grab the last question.
Sure.
And what I'd like to know is, Katie, did you see the Oregonian piece that tracked the usage at a Renco station? And what they did is do you remember seeing the?
It was not too long
It
ago,
was
but
about
I,
a year ago,
Yeah.
and what they found, and I guess I'd ask you to validate this for me, my thesis that I extracted from the Oregonian article is that in this planned transit-centric community of a Renco station that was built to be transit-friendly with bus and rail and pedestrian and density, that there was only a very, very minor, like 2% statistical decrease in automobile use when all these fancy, highly subsidized amenities were available. And if that holds true, my concern is that we spent a lot of money and a lot of effort in this planning community that's not behaving as designed.
Was designed. So, I don't know the scientific numbers, but this is that's kind of my hood. I can tell you what I've observed.
Please.
Orenco Station on the north side of Cornell is a different community than Orenco Station on the south side of Cornell. I would say that in likelihood, the south side of Cornell, where it's multifamily, attached housing a lot, probably do use it more. Matter of fact, the train goes right there, except from the apartments there, you can't actually get to the station, you have to walk out to the street and around. So that's kind of a weird thing, missed opportunity, but still, that's the multifamily, and they very well may do that, may ride more. The north side, those homes, there are some that are fourplexes, and very nice homes. You wouldn't know that they're fourplexes, and some are single detached. It's kind of different, and it's kind of a very nice community, except they don't strike me as public transportation users, and for them to get to the station, it's a little bit of a walk. Now, they're also building platform, just had a grand opening, platform, I forget the name, this big, beautiful, everyone's talking very highly of this multifamily building that's going up, and it is getting built more. And so it may be a project that hasn't fully come to fruition yet. As far as Orenco Station, it may be there. Originally, the numbers were not good. It took them a few years. They've increased. But I would agree that it's been long. It's been this is 15-year anniversary. September 12th, 1998, I think, is when Al Gore was out and kind of broke the ground out there. It was just fields, and now it's not. I mean, it's a full community there. And I don't know where the ridership is and impacted from that at this point either. One of the things I'm going to head out and not talk about, and not answer any questions because Eric won the last question, and I only have 8 of these. Good luck understanding this. This is ODOT's sources and uses of funds. It's their current budget that we're in, the 11-13 budget. One of the things I wanted to point out, and I was doing some number crunching of it, the $5 million, or excuse me, $5 billion that they get. They give out a lot of it. About $1 billion goes out to cities and counties, they collect about $75 million for other agencies, and then there's some that are dedicated. So about $3.8 billion go out to other projects. This is where the $3.8 billion goes. But of their revenues, this is government accounting now, when they go out and borrow money through a bond offering, they consider that revenue. I consider it debt, but they consider it revenue. And they have in this budget $640 million is from bond offerings. Now, and this little box right here is their revenue, right there. And then this is how they spend it over here. One of the interesting things is, oh, by the way, while they neatly list out where they get their money from, in their budget presentation, they never neatly list out where they spend their money. But they use some pretty colors over here, so you feel really good about it. And of the funds that are left, the $3.8 billion that are left, $1 billion comes from the federal government, $1 billion is coming from bonds, and $1.8 billion are coming from state taxes and fees and such. Now we have, I'll just say this a little bit, where we're going with our transportation dollars is there's a decrease going on. I pulled up their economic forecast from December, and I really came away with no information. But it's really nicely typed, and they use some good colors and stuff. But what we have going on is this.
Now you're a CPA, aren't you? You got a financial or an economic forecast, and you got no information out of it, but it has pretty colors.
But it has good font.
It has good font. One of the things I learned being in the legislature is a lot of times people say use a lot of words and say very little. Perhaps like I've been doing tonight, but they color it up and they tell their story of what they want you to hear, but not necessarily what you need to hear. And so there's a declining of the tax base that we're used to be from excise taxes on gas tax or weight and mile for commercial drivers. We have in this nation, and in the world as well, we have fuel economy that we're driving for better fuel economy with our personal vehicles. We're also trying to get people off of cars. If we have better fuel economy and are trying to push people into public transportation, does that decrease or increase the excise tax per gallon that we collect at the gas pump? Decrease. Because we don't, if I was getting five,
Just raise the price.
so they did, effective 1/1/11, they did that 6 cents a gallon gas tax raise. And rather than saying, let's increase fees at DMV, where you might notice that you're paying 50 or 80 more, and they did that too, but 50 or 80 more bucks or whatever it is, they do it through the 6 cents a gallon, and it kind of like a lot of people aren't as sensitive to it. So when I was in the legislature in 12 or 11, I forget, DOT came, Oregon ODOT came before us and said that that gas tax collection, they were actually getting I think it was $24 million less than forecasted. And then the federal government, they knew that the federal government was also collecting less than fuel tax. And so our share from the federal government was also less. They had accommodated for less, but they didn't accommodate for the significant decrease they were getting from the federal government. Now, counter that, when I was in the legislature, no state in the union has done this yet, and Oregon wanted to be first, and I didn't understand it, and we didn't do it, but we will eventually, because we're also going away from petroleum-based fuels, fossil fuels, and they're looking for hybrids or electric or water-based vehicles and such, that even is going to pull more on the gas tax. So what they're trying to do is get through a per mile fee, which kind of makes sense, because whether you're fossil-based or some other base, if you're wear and tear, it kind of makes sense, except it now requires reporting. And that was my big issue. Believe it or not, as a conservative, I asked the ACLU to come to my office and talk to me about privacy issues. And because I wanted to get their read on, they weren't following this bill at that point. I don't know if they are. But when you go to the mileage, you have to report somehow. And either it will be through a transponder that reports directly to DMV, you're traveling, or you have to report electronically or whatever self-reports, much like your tax return, but you have to report your driving habits, and you have to report your driving habits in the state. Thank you for the extra time, and outside. So there's it's problematic from the reporting side, and what does that look like? So ODOT's going to have a bigger issue. And I will tell you, when I said that they said nothing, I'll end with this. Remember when I told you that 6 cents a gallon was going to give us $24 million less, we collected $24 million less than they forecasted at that moment in time. This did not talk about that. What this said was the 6 cents a gallon gas tax really had a minimal impact on drivers' decision whether or not to buy gas, and they'll talk about it later. When I went to later in the report, it didn't mention about the declining collections. They don't want you to think, and it's probably true, that the 6 cents a gallon caused people to not buy as much gas. It probably didn't. But regardless, the collections went down from what was forecasted. So,
Yeah, that's mainly due to cars getting better gas mileage.
That's right. Well,
Also the economy, less people driving to.
yeah, so for various reasons, but there's less money coming in, and that's important for us to know. So,
That's why they tightened up the budget, and there's less money going out. You know, they need to.
Washington County.
$1 million more is not less.
I get the last question.
No,
Katie
wait a
Eyre,
minute, wait a
would
minute.
you come back for more abuse?
So far, I've survived. Yes, I would at some point.
Awesome, then it's applause time. So I really want to thank you, thank you.
Eric.
I think that was a great discussion. There were some people, you guys had some awesome questions. Lyles, would you jump in and give us some land use application fun?
Okay. Not too much, but a little bit. In the past, about the last 5 or 6 months ago, you heard about one of those aquifer storage and recovery facilities up on Miller Hill Road. We have the one at the Jenkins Estate, but this is another one, a little bit up north. This is done by the Joint Water Commission, not Tualatin Valley Water District. They're going to have an open house on June 13th, Thursday, from 6 to 7 p.m. at the site, which is 8655 Miller Hill Road. If anybody's interested, they can come and get this from me, and they're gonna give you an open house to begin, give you updates about it. And this came to the CPO mailbox from the city of Beaverton, and it's got some dates and times and descriptions on what the city of Beaverton is doing with different summertime things, and there's gonna be more, but if you'd like to have this to take home, please feel free. We have I've mentioned before, we've had the land use application for, you know where the Blanton House is in Loa, around the corner, they're gonna put a Montessori school at 16830 Blanton Street. This is the type 3 public notice, and I'm guessing it has to be type 3 because it's a school or an institution. No, it's gonna be type 3 because it's gonna be it's a special use for that property. And then we have the public notice for a 27 lot subdivision at, on the corner of 175th and Blanton. And it's a type 2 public notice. And you know where the Chevron station is on 170th and TV Highway? I've talked to the people in there in the past, and they said that they're gonna get a new gas station, they're gonna remodel it. Well, we've got the land use application, so I think they're gonna put on, what I heard in talking to the people there is that, you know how they put the extra mile store at the 185th and TV Highway? They're gonna give a little bit better store and some more remodeling and things like that at the 170th Avenue Chevron. And this is a CPO6 land use application, which is just north of us. Our northern boundary is Baseline Road. So I'm sure many of you know about the manufactured home park that used to be near 205th, 201st, and Baseline. There's going to be development there in multiple phases, which I've mentioned before. And this phase is going to be a 74-lot, single-family detached residential subdivision, and it's going to be close to the corner of Southwest 205th and Baseline.
Are those ranch homes?
Yeah.
1970 style ranch homes.
They look like a file cabinet, but they're ranch.
If they're detached, well,
Vertically.
getting back to what Katie talked about, this is in this district, since you know the Orenco station is just a little bit up north of that area, it's in one of those transit-oriented districts, and so they have to build so many houses per acre, and the zoning is R18 to 24, but yeah, it's going to be high density.
It already is.
Well, it's gonna be nice.
They're starting.
And that road is the worst road.
Yeah.
It's so.
Okay, the next one is,
No.
this is the, you're familiar with the Walgreens application on
Yeah.
185th and Farmington Road. We've got the notice of decision on it, and the application has been approved. I don't know when they're gonna start building. I kinda thought they'd start building sooner than now, but they probably, I didn't know the application timeframe, but now that it's approved, you might see some building or.
Something going on, you saw some surveyor type.
At where?
Something out there.
At that location?
Yeah, the other day when I was going past.
I haven't seen anything.
You just said surveyor.
Oh, okay, well, yeah, but they're probably working on Farmington Road too.
Are they gonna still expand now?
They were
Are
in
they gonna
that
still
corner.
widen Farmington?
Just a little bit at that intersection and 185th. Also, the quarry out on Southwest Farmington Road, every so often for a facility like that, they have a 5-year review of the conditions of its operation. We're working on that. And also for the same facility, they want to put, I haven't read every word of this, but they want to put a asphalt plant in, and that's going to be only temporary.
Is that for Baker Rock or is it the other
Baker,
quarry?
yeah, Baker. And we had the application, the past several months ago for the Edwards Center over here on Kenneman. They put some detached living units in, and it was approved, and I don't know how far along they are right now, but this is a development application for them to add 5 more. Any questions?
Can I add something to you? Up on Miller Hill Road, after you get over that little hump.
Past Gassman?
No, before you get to Gassner, on the left-hand side, Venture Properties will probably start building their homes next month.
Next month?
That was the one that had the 21 houses.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, that was approved a while back, but I think they'll start next month.
Is that it from the mailbox?
Also, a quick note,
Yeah.
Very briefly.
Winkleman Park up on 175th, just past Vaney Road, is now open. There's a dog park there and a recreation sports field. It's open, so real nice dog park.
Outside of THPRD boundaries,
Hey,
surprisingly.
they got the land for free, they had to build it.
I want to close the meeting out very quickly.
I want to
Sandy,
make one more comment.
Very quickly.
I want to just let everybody know, because Shirley and I both worked at Hollywood Video, or Being Crazy in Wilsonville. And the West used to be busy with all of us riding down there back and forth from this area. But when that went down and a couple of other businesses, it's been very sparse. But we did used to use it when we were working.
excellent. Very high likelihood we will have a July meeting. It will not be near the holiday. I'll probably advance it to the Tuesday or Thursday following the July 4th holiday, with so many things going on with Lower Reedville, TV highway study, South Cooper Mountain is on fire with a lot of controversy. Not to mention just general CPO stuff. Keep an eye out in the newspaper, and check our Facebook page, because it may not be at the first Thursday. Well, too bad. Somebody else does. That being said, folks, sorry.
And you were talking about South Hill, South Cooper Mountain, now they
Yes.
got they have a North Cooper Mountain, it's gonna come all the way down to Gassner.
Yes, and North Cooper Mountain is being planned by Beaverton, and there's having a real tough time interfacing with City of Beaverton planners. You'll be reading about that in the newspaper.
I love the quote in the newspaper with you, where you said you were stuck in a mile-and-a-half traffic jam, and the guy that's selling the property, there's no traffic problems out here. So funny, I'm like,
Well, I hope that one doesn't go through.
Well, I think I want to close the meeting now. Bye, thank you. Bye-bye.
yeah, and it goes a great.
You want this one?
I hadn't heard.
Would you, I'd like,
No, you got writing, that's probably.
When I went to
They were trying to make you and
that's not cool. You just don't beg.
Thanks for
That's it, but I wrote it.
Oh, yeah, cool. Those were brought to my office today.
Citizen advisory and citizen advisory.
I did that, I think I wrote it on a free weekend or something, exactly.
I haven't been able to get out and about since like October. I've been working this crazy job. I worked I was working for Precision Door Service doing garage door repairs. And it was just like crazy hours. Just 6 hours a
I
day.
liked it when I was
About
living
late,
out
I get off work at 6, start talking to them. DJ up to old. Necessity, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I ended up injuring myself. So like, who knows what's going to happen. But it's nice because I'm free now.
See you Wednesday night.
Yeah, that's
I'll be over training.
Yeah, that's all.
I still keep up with everything online and really appreciate the emails.
That was like great. I appreciate it.
One thing that's so much, someone must be, she's talking about going or something.
You've got boots on work now.
But something else
So I'm going to
you can take, I mean, you can take a filter for all that information, but ultimately,
I was in the game crazy.
I hear something, this sounds like you.
Oh, yeah, well, that's what I thought.
Oh, girl. And that's why they're elected. They know, and we know, and
Well, that's when the cops sit down,
She's a
Yeah.
tall girl.
Then we'll
I think you can do that during the
And
daytime.
that's,
Oh,
I
well,
think
we
that's
moved to our
the
house,
thing.
so we used to have a
People want
house.
to
You can thank Bob.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Bob.
And one of the
As
places
opposed
where
to
we
really
went,
people
was
that
like
use
the
words.
All I know.
Well, yeah, it does.
I did.
Thank you.
Ray, I really appreciate your input.
And so it's perfect, the way you guys have done it, so you can have a discussion.
I don't care what the guy did.
Yeah. You know?
That's what my problem is.
closing things
That bridge is made out of
Closing things
wood
up.
pilings down here.